Good Friday morning, and welcome to this week's episode of Finding God in the Dark. You know our names by now. And today, today, today is going to be a therapy session because, well, I don't know about Jonathan, but I feel traumatized by the film that we watched this week. We watched the 1988 Martin Scorsese directed film, The Last Temptation of Christ, starring, among others, Willem Dafoe, Harvey Keitel. Um, let's get like the particulars out of the way up front. It is a Jesus movie. It
Mhm.
is not based on the Gospels. It is based on the book by the same name, and don't dare me to pronounce the author's name. But the author is Russian, I believe. The basic premise of the story, as far as I could tell, which we'll go with what that is that it's almost a what if story, right? What if Jesus was really just a man that God chose and he made a different choice on the cross? Am I somewhere in the ballpark here?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
it emphasizes the humanity of Jesus,
Yes, absolutely.
which we can get into. Do you want to just dive into it?
Yeah, let's just dive into it. I don't think we
Okay.
need any more
So
background on
so,
it.
so if I'm
And
functional,
and and ahead of time too. Spoiler warning, if you haven't seen this film, like me, this was the first time I saw it. It is from 1988.
yeah,
So, if you haven't seen it by now, silly person.
yeah,
Uh I count myself among that crew, but yeah, dive in, John.
yeah. Okay, so just so people are aware, because I do want to make sure they're aware. There's nudity, there's sex, there's very adult themes. So
Yeah.
keep that in mind. It's not like a Jesus movie, like I don't know
The greatest story ever told or
the
something
greatest
like that.
story ever. It's not something you can easily put in and not have to really deal with some hard issues. So
Right.
it's not an easy watch
Right.
for a lot of reasons. So if I'm going to play therapist for a little while, I would probably start with what were your first impressions, Don, and what did you struggle with?
I think the things that I get I guess really struck me were that Scorsese goes a very long way towards the human side of Jesus,
Okay. Mhm.
which is it's jarring
Yeah.
from a faith perspective. It's jarring. It's hard to swallow, and sometimes even hard to follow in the film
Mhm.
because you're expecting something different.
Yeah.
So I'm part of that is you bring your own expectations to this, right? And it's not what you expect.
Yeah.
Um, I do have to say that I appreciate that there is such a focus in this film on sin and
Mhm.
brokenness.
Yeah.
Now, and that's another, I think, jarring thing because it's Jesus saying how he regrets all the bad things he's done and what a terrible
Yeah.
person he's been. And you're kind of going, well, but that's not the Jesus that I know from the movies and I know from the scriptures and
Gospel. Yeah. Yeah.
so it feels it has it's very jarring at points.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I like the fact that it makes you wrestle with the idea that Jesus was fully human, which is
Hmm.
something that Orthodox Christianity affirms. Um, and I do think I had a professor in college once say, uh, you know, we talk about Jesus as human, but nobody really wants to think about Jesus being sexually aroused or going to the bathroom. But
Right.
those realities happened, right? He was a 13-year-old boy. And if you have ever been a 13-year-old boy, or if you've ever been around 13-year-old boys, they have issues around sexuality they have to work out,
Yeah.
and Jesus did too. And So I
Was
think
it Robin Williams who said something about Mr. Williams, you want to come up to the board and solve this problem? No, thanks, that's okay. Oh, it's Eddie
yes.
Murphy. That's
Yeah,
all right.
yeah, yeah. You know, so in that regard, and I think that's part of why it's so jarring, is most Christians don't think about his humanity and don't struggle with what that meant and rec- and to me he really doesn't get here, but the Eastern Orthodox, I feel like, have a much better understanding of the idea of sacrifice in the incarnation, because
Mhm.
they talk about every part of it was a sacrifice. So the cross isn't just Jesus' sacrifice. Everything is God's sacrifice. Becoming a baby, being hungry, being cold, being lonely, all of that's a sacrifice. And so I think it is jarring, but in the same regards, it's jarring because we really don't embrace the theology we claim that we have.
Hmm.
So some of that is part of that. Um, yeah, I mean, what else did you struggle with other parts of it?
Well, I don't know. I think that was really the big thing for me. Once I got to the point where, okay, I see where the director's going here,
Yeah.
in that he's really focusing on the fully man part.
Mm,
Even, even to the point of, again, sexuality, to the point of his aging, and like, because the whole last temptation literally takes place between his, be on the cross,
yeah,
between his saying, Father, why have you forsaken me, and it is finished.
yeah, that's right. Yeah,
That whole last, like, he's on the cross, and you're going, this is a 2 hour, 45-minute movie, and it's only, like, there's another almost an hour yet left to go.
yeah,
Like, what's happening here? Are we going to get the resurrection? But you didn't. You
yeah,
got him coming down off the cross and
yeah,
going and living a whole life
yeah,
and having children.
yeah, and and again, I think that we don't think about that as a temptation, but being normal and fitting in is a temptation for not just Jesus, but for Christians, right?
Yeah.
We are called to present to the world a different way of being human and a different way of being a community. And both of those things should make us radically stick out. But for most of us, for human beings in general, we don't want to stick out because, in terms of evolutionary development, right? Sticking out meant you usually died.
Right.
So our genes want us to fit in, want us to be social, want other people to like us. I mean, that's why standing up against the crowd is so hard, because literally our bodies don't want us to do it, right?
Hmm.
Because our genes have survived because we fit in. And so, again, I think that is a temptation that we don't think about, but it had to be a temptation for Jesus to just be normal, to just go and have a wife and have kids and love the community you're in, but not be this dangerous threat that ultimately gets you killed. Like that
Yeah.
that had to be a temptation he struggled with. I think for me, the biggest thing I struggle with the film is it almost feels like Jesus is throwing spaghetti on the wall to see what sticks.
Yeah, there's that.
It's
I see,
like
saw that.
it's
Yeah.
like I'm gonna try revolutionary violence. Well, that's not working. Okay, so I'm gonna try telling people to love each other. Well, that's not working, and so I'm gonna try sacrificing my life. Well, maybe that'll work. And that's the part I don't resonate with, because I don't think Jesus was ever that confused about what he was doing.
Yeah, I
You know?
mean, at least theologically, we understand there was a plan, right?
Yeah,
There was a plan all along
yeah,
for the salvation of broken humanity,
yeah,
and it wasn't violent revolution, and it wasn't just love everybody, but that it was about sacrifice.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, you're right. That was a little jarring as well. That sort of like, well, who are you? What are you doing? Why are you, like, where's your, I don't know, a little
And I,
actor thing coming out here. What's the motivation here, you know?
and I do think Jesus struggled. I don't want to say he didn't struggle, but again, it goes to the Chalcedonian Creed, right? The creed, one of the early creeds that we usually don't say in church because it's about 2 pages long. But this idea, right, of that the early church leaders wanted to say that for Jesus to save us, Jesus has to save all of us.
Right,
So Jesus has to be fully human, but that just doesn't mean he had a body. It means he had a will, and he had, he and so the early church said no. Jesus had two wills. Jesus had a human will and a divine will, but they worked together. And there was, things that ultimately were viewed as heresy, that basically said the divine will came and took over the human will, and that was the nature and will that Jesus had, right? And the early church said no, 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 no. If he's going to save us, he's got to save all of us, which means he's got to save us as a human, as our nature, and in our will. But these wills were working together in unison, right? And in this movie, Scorsese, and I'm guessing the book, I never read the book, probably never will, but
yeah,
my guess is they really want to play with this idea that the human will is kind of going over here and the divine will is kind of going over here, and not till the very end do they come together. And I guess I struggle with that because I really believe the incarnation is this idea that God comes and becomes part of humanity, and humanity and God can work together, right? And can go in the same direction. I mean, that's the hope, right? That's the hope of
right,
the Christian faith, is that sin doesn't win and doesn't ultimately separate us for good, but God, through God's work, can realign everything, and humans can actually work with God and work towards something greater. And so to me, that's the part of the film I really struggle with, because I don't think Jesus's human will was going over here and Jesus's divine will was going over here. I believe that in the incarnation we get to see what humanity truly can be, which is truly united and completely connected with God. So,
yeah.
yeah.
And Scorsese, I mean, this is the I think the third film of his that we watched, because we watched Silence, and then Kundun,
Hunan, yeah.
and now this, all very much faith related films. And
Yeah.
you had an observation before we started recording about, wouldn't it be nice to be able to sit down with Scorsese and just ask him about his faith? Because
Yeah,
uh,
and I don't know how we'll have this. We've never had this conversation, but I'm not a huge fan of the penal atonement theory of uh, penal substitutionary atonement theory of salvation. I
mhm,
think it misses a lot. And what's interesting is Scorsese seems to be obsessed with it, to believe that Jesus, uh, what matters is his death on the cross more than anything else. And what I usually lean toward is a much earlier atonement theory, which is uh, uh, Irenaeus of Lyon. He was a bishop in France in the third century, so 200s,
mhm,
and he argued that God wasn't reacting to sin. God wasn't like, oh God, on the fly, I got to come up with a plan. God was always planning on sending the second person of the Trinity to be incarnated, and then to kind of be the means by which God more deeply connects with all of creation. And sin made Jesus have to do more work, but the plan was always for God to be incarnate with all of creation. And so he argued that what the incarnation does is it envelops all of what it means to be human and a creature. And it brings all of that into the divine life, which redeems and heals all of that and brings wholeness to all of that. And that's to me is just a more satisfying understanding of salvation for me. And so Jesus dies on the cross because death is a reality of life. And God wants to bring that into the divine life to redeem it and heal it. People being angry at each other and wanting to hurt each other is a part of life. And so the cross helps God bring that brokenness and that anger and that fear and that hatred into the divine life so it can be healed and renewed and brought into something else,
Hmm.
and so to me, I guess what I struggle with this movie is for Scorsese, he keeps seemingly going, well, peace doesn't work, um, and violent revolution doesn't work, but the cross works, and the cross is the only thing that works. And to me, no. What Jesus is doing is Jesus is bringing the divine love and grace to all of life and healing all of it because all of it has broken edges and all of it has elements that need God's grace to it, and it's not just about death and it's not just about violence. It's also about how we love one another. That needs to be smoothed over and healed and renewed. And, and how we have relationships with our friends needs, like, so all of it can be blessed by the divine grace coming into it. And so for me, that's just a more satisfying atonement theory. And so I struggled with the fact that he kept on seemingly going the cross, the cross, the cross, the cross, which, I get. You get that, you can get that from scripture if you read it a certain way, obviously. But to me, it's missing a lot of what Jesus is doing, in my opinion.
Hmm.
So,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, we're probably in different places on that one, I think. Uh, but that's we're like that on a lot of things, I think, and
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah.
It was to me it was very interesting in that there were almost foreshadowing because this is obviously well before him, but there was also some to me some foreshadowing of Dan Brown.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Of some of the Da Vinci Code stuff
Yeah.
about Jesus marrying Mary Magdalene and having children and this line of Merovingian kings who were descendants of Jesus and that sort of thing. That was that was mildly interesting. Um, it's funny because when I first as I was first watching it and he was on the cross and he said, Father, why have you forsaken me? And then his guardian angel was there and took him down off the cross. I would have sworn if I had stopped the film right after that, I would have sworn that as he was walking away from the cross that he was still on it.
Mm.
That what was happening after that was all a dream.
Mm.
Now I saw it, I guess they reflect back to that later in the film.
Mm.
And the cross is empty.
Yeah.
As he's walking away, the cross is empty. So the whole thing, I mean, that whole last temptation, that whole what happens between Father, what's it? Father, why have you forsaken me? And it's finished.
Yeah.
That he goes and lives this life
Mhm.
is sort of it's not really a dream. It's almost like he at the end says, "No, it was a mistake, Lord," and he goes back in time almost
Mhm.
to being back on the cross, and then says, "Well, he doesn't say it is finished in the
It
film.
is
He
a
says
problem.
it is accomplished."
Yeah, which
But
is a way to translate the Greek. I mean, it is a
sure,
way to translate the Greek.
yeah,
Um, yeah, there's actually something powerful that I didn't notice till I've probably watched this film maybe two or three times,
okay,
but um, the guardian angel, which is really Satan. We
Yes.
don't know of it till the end, although you can kind of gather. You're kind of like, you know. Um, but she says something that I think is a perfect way of understanding um, s- sexual avarice and pornography, which is she says to him, he loses. Mary Magdalene dies,
Hmm.
and that's his first wife, and she says to him, basically, go take Martha and Mary as your wives, and she goes, there is but one woman with many faces.
One woman, there's one woman in the world with many faces. Yeah.
Yeah, to me, that is a powerful way of understanding lust and pornography. It's this idea that
Yeah.
um, that it's really about my needs, and these people aren't individuals. These people really don't matter. They don't have agency outside of serving me, and
Hmm.
so I can just replace them as I see fit. Like if I need
Yeah.
another woman, I'll just get one.
Yeah.
Um, and to me, that is a very interesting way, and I think a powerful way to talk about sin. You know, uh, sin really boils down to misusing people in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
It
Sure
boils down
does.
to not recognizing their sacred worth and their agency, and you just kind of ignore that because you need something from them, right?
Hmm.
And so to me, like that was a really powerful thing. That I'm like, wow, that's a really interesting way of talking about, especially sexual sin. To say, do you see this person as an actual person, or are you simply using them for what you need? You need another wife. You need another sexual gratification,
Right.
and that's all that matters.
Right. Yeah, yeah, and that was a powerful bit in the film. Just that, okay, he goes back to Mary Magdalene. She had been a prostitute.
Right.
He had we get the impression he had had a relationship with her before, and then she was a prostitute, and he tried to come back to her, and she rejected him,
Yeah,
and
she talks about him being a virgin, so it's almost like they fell in love, but he wouldn't go down the road. He felt like he shouldn't go down the road of getting married, and then that kind of spun her off into
Mhm.
searching for a way to make a living, and so she turns into prostitution. Which again, unfortunately, that's not part of the scripture. Mary
Right.
Magdalene wasn't a prostitute. That was actually a pope about a thousand years later, trying to. He was trying to do a good thing. He was trying to weave all these women in the Gospels that Jesus interacted with and make a powerful statement about, Jesus can redeem you, and you can even become the apostle to the apostles, which Mary is often called. She's the person that
Right.
brings the message of the resurrection to his followers, right? And unfortunately, that sermon stuck, and Mary's kind of been lambasted with
Yeah.
that. You know, um, I don't know. I think the one thing I guess to take us off, I don't want to lose sight of this is one thing I really liked about this movie, which I've never seen in another Jesus movie, and I wish I had money to make my own Jesus movie. But this is actually more historically accurate around the Passion than most Jesus films are. Like
Okay.
Jesus would have just carried his crossbeam. He
Right.
would have been stripped naked and forced to walk through Jerusalem and been forced to hang on the cross naked. He
Hmm.
would have only been a couple feet off the ground, and they did all of those things so that most people that were crucified were left up there, and their bodies were literally, they kind of reference this, their bodies were eaten by birds and the animals.
Hmm.
Uh, they put them on very busy streets or roads leading into communities so that the fear of God, or I guess actually the better way to put it, the fear of Rome
Rome. Yeah.
would be put into the people that came into the city, right?
Hmm.
And they were stripped naked to humiliate them and to scare the people that would see them.
Yeah.
And um, I feel like most Jesus movies don't want to deal with that again because we don't want to see Jesus naked, and I get that, and they do creatively a way in this movie where you don't see uh, his private area,
Yeah.
but um, they're also interestingly accurate because they do have. We're pretty confident now that he was nailed through his wrist.
Mm-hmm.
There is a nerve center right there, and there's also the folks who crucified folks were actually trained, so they'd hit the nerve center and not hit the artery that's in your wrist.
Right.
And you also they also believe that you were actually uh, you were actually nailed through not on your feet but on your ankle bone. And again, it's a nerve center and an artery, and people were trained to miss the artery and hit the nerve center. And so you see all of that in this movie in ways I really haven't seen in other
Yeah.
Jesus movies. So I was happy to see that, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the other films that we're going to look at during Lent,
Yeah.
um, the the Mel Gibson film,
Passion of the Christ.
The Passion, that uh, people raved about that and how realistic all of that was, and yet it is different from this, right?
Mhm.
It's this is definitely, I think this was probably pushing boundaries for the 80s.
Yeah,
And what Gibson did was pushing boundaries for the 2000s.
yeah,
Um, you know, uh, but either way, I mean, any way you look at it, if you've ever read about what crucifixion is, it's a horrible way to die.
yes, it is.
It's a horrible, painful, torturous way to die, regardless of, where they put the nails.
Well, and
Um,
and I think again, we need to set with that more.
yeah. Yeah. Well, look, I may have mentioned this before. I had a seminary professor who was, now I'm a Methodist. I went to a Baptist seminary, and I had a professor who was a Presbyterian, go figure, uh, who said that he felt sometimes our Catholic brothers and sisters got it right
Oh
by
yeah.
leaving Christ
Yeah.
on the cross because he still suffers, you know?
Yeah. Well, and
Um,
that's where I resonate with the penal substitutionary atonement theory is the cross does matter. And he's up there because of sin. And we're called to remember that we have that sin within us, right? We have that tendency to hate someone so much, we would have no problem with them being naked, beaten, and bleeding to death on a cross just because uh, we're angry with them,
yeah,
and that reality is something that is important for us to sit with.
yeah, yeah, yeah. This is look, I'm gonna because we have to wrap up a little bit. But I'm gonna say that I won't give this film a hearty thumbs up. I think it is worth seeing, but understand that it's a tough film to watch. It's
Yeah.
not what you're expecting from a Jesus film. You might want to talk about it
Yeah.
afterwards,
Yeah, and
because it's
Judas is the
challenging. What's
Judas
that?
is the hero. Judas is the hero. Jesus isn't.
Yeah, Judas is really kind of the hero of the film, which is really interesting, right? That's an interesting aspect we didn't really touch on. That ultimately Judas in the film turns Jesus over to the authorities because Jesus told him to,
And that's
not
actually
because he was
part,
angry.
that's actually part of a or third century gospel called the Gospel of Judas.
Okay.
Uh, this idea that Judas was actually doing what Jesus wanted him to do because again he needed to die
Hmm.
and he needed to die in this way. And yeah, it's what's good about this movie is I think if you come into it with how is this going to push me, and then let me re-examine those questions in light of the Gospels. I think that's a good way to do it. Is
Yeah.
this movie's going to lift up some really important questions, then take them to the Gospels or tradition and
Yeah.
examine them from there. Yeah.
Particularly, and as we've said, I think particularly questions about sin. What is sin? What is temptation?
What does
Where
it mean to be? What does it mean for Jesus to be human? Like those are important questions.
that's particularly for our theology, right?
Yeah.
If we believe that theology, Jesus is fully God and fully human, fully God and fully man. What does that mean? And so, thank you, Martin Scorsese, for at least giving us some idea of what that might mean.
Yeah.
Y-
Talk
you
about
know, it's worth talking about. Absolutely. So, friends, keep talking about it. And the film for next week. So we are going to continue in these Jesus films, and next week we probably won't need quite so much therapy.
it.
The film next week is Jesus of Nazareth, and I don't know anything to say about that one. I haven't looked it up yet.
That's
Um,
one of the more classic ones. I was
it
surprised you
is
didn't start with that one. I'll be
It
honest.
is one of the more, well, because we're starting with sin and temptation,
Okay,
right? So
that's
we're
good.
starting in the desert, and this was a good represent. He spends a lot of time in the beginning of the film talking about going to the desert, going to the desert, going to the desert.
Yeah.
So, we are talking about sin and temptation, and this
Yeah.
film fits that role.
Is this the really long film? Is this like it's like 4 or 5 hours, right? Or am I wrong?
I don't think, gosh, I hope not. Hold on, let me see how much time we have left. I'll look it up. Um, Jesus. Um, it is epic, inspiring. It's a 1977 drama chronicling the birth, life, crucifixion, and resurrection of Jesus. Laurence Olivier, James Earl Jones, Ian McShane. Um, oh, yeah, yes, it is. 382 minutes.
Yeah. Woo. So
So
don't wait till the night before, Doug.
don't wait till the night before. Get the big bucket of popcorn or so. I
Yeah.
don't know. All right, friends. Until next week, our film for next week is Jesus of Nazareth. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you all next Friday. Take care and God bless.
Blessings.
Friends, thank you again for watching the Finding God in the Dark podcast. If you're finding these discussions helpful or meaningful in your Christian walk, then we'd invite you to go ahead and subscribe down below. Get more of this content. We publish every Friday morning at 10 a.m. And we're so glad that you can be with us and enjoy these discussions as well. Take care and God bless. Bye now.